Hello and welcome to another edition of the Low Code Cafe. This is episode number 128 for February 22, 2023. Today we're going to continue building a low code app and get into invoicing logic. And I think it'll be a useful demonstration of how you can build invoices within Plantain App. I am Dale Warner, head of support for Plantain App, and I'm joined today. Patrick Anderson is also on the call, doing behind the scenes duties and keeping me from going too far astray if I run into problems. This Low Code Cafe is an event we do every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Central Time, and it's an opportunity to just show techniques for low code and Plantain App. And we invite you to be our guest speaker. We have several guest speakers that are going to be on episodes in the coming months, but we would enjoy having and hosting you if you have an application that you've built in Plantain App that you would like to demonstrate, or a technique that you've done. All of our past episodes are out on YouTube, youtube.com/PlantainApp, and we invite you to use that QR code or the links in the emails that we're going to paste on the chat or in the emails that we send you to sign up for this channel and subscribe so that you know when we post new content. Today we'll be doing a brief from the trenches segment, talking about things that we're finding from the trenches of support, and then we'll move on into hands-on low-code development in our fitness center application. So from the trenches, we have another hotfix released to version 1.24 that goes with the 14 previous that were in this release. This includes I have it listed here as a bug fix, but it's actually a new feature where you can extract PDF action. I thought I'd demonstrated it. Pretty easy to show you. So what I have is, first of all, I built a sample PDF document, and it has 5 pages, and we're just going to extract pages from this test document. So I have page 1, and then this is page 2, same text, but a little bit different formatting, you'll notice. Page 3, the whole thing is bolded and italicized. Page 4 and page 5. So we have a 5-page document, and by the way, I use there's a nice, somebody's posted a loremipsum.io.com, a nice text generator when you just need a little bit of extra text. So I'll make you aware that's out there for fun. And so I've built a very simple form that's going to let us demonstrate this functionality. So let's get into what the form looks like. I'm going to open that in a full screen in a new tab. This is a technique I like to use so I can have everything open at once. So here's the page that I'm working with, so we can try it out. And then on this one, this is the definition of it. So I have just 2 elements: choose a field, choose a PDF, a single file upload, so I can send my 5-page document up to the system, and this is configured to accept a file type of PDF. I am putting it in my temp folder when it gets uploaded. If it happens to be a duplicate, I'm renaming it. But this is called choose a PDF. That's its ID. So then in the button, when you click the button to upload it, it has some actions. And so we'll see our new action at work here first. The source file for our extract PDF action is the choose a PDF relative URL. I just took one of the outputs from choose a PDF element. The single file upload puts out a number of outputs. One of them is relative URL. This says we can accept a relative or an absolute URL or a physical path. So we can accept different things, and I'm just picking one. So this passes in to extract PDF. the PDF that we want to work with. And then you can extract any number of sections, and this is done by page number. The numbering starts at 0, so 0 is actually going to give me the first page of my document. So I'm going from page 0 to page 0. That'll give us one page. We're going to send that also to the temp folder, and I'm going to give it a name, and I'm using GUID new compact to just ensure that the name is completely unique, but it's a naming scheme that I pick. It's kind of useful to make the name completely unique so that when we download it, since it's new each time, it doesn't get cached. You don't get confused about the output that you're seeing or having to force refresh it to get new output. So we have my extract PDF, and it's in a token called new PDF, and this one is commented out, so we can ignore that for the moment. It's disabled, and so we are just sending new PDF absolute URL. We're doing a redirect to that and opening it in a new tab. So this is just going to create that extracted extract and then open it up in a new tab. So we can try this out. I'm going to save my changes here. I don't think I made any. So we'll pick the file and my sample 5-page document. And so when we say upload and extract, we click the button, we get an output that is 1 page long and has just our page 1. So we can just kind of play with this now that we've got it working, play with this a little bit. So in our extract, for example, we can also do 1 to 99. It will just go up to 99 pages or through the end. I just wanted to let you know it will support that. So this will give us our whole document. And so we'll do the same thing again. And now we have 5 pages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all 5 of our pages. Playing around here just to illustrate what can be done. If we wanted to go backwards, for example, we just wanted to completely reverse the order of the document. We could do something like that. So now when we upload an extract, it starts at page 5 and works backwards. So lots of different ways to play with this. This was developed for, I think, for an internal client. Somebody needed this capability to be able to pull from different PDFs. And so it's just kind of a useful tool. Together with, we have the ability to merge PDFs. And I have an illustration of that. I'm not going to go into it, but for example, the merge PDF allows you to take 2 different files and put them together. So you could pull out the different pages that you need, recombine them into a single PDF that you could then send for download, or pull pages from different documents. Perhaps you pull the summary from every document that you're creating and create a total summary document. But yep, extract is a new tool that you can use together with merge and use it in a number of ways. Good. So that is the illustration today in the From the Trenches segment. New feature, and so that's a hotfix available for 124. Talk for a second about some known issues in 124. There is some things having to do with the recommended and critical hotfixes. The functionality is I just want to point out some functionality things with it, and also what the Install Now button means. It really means view the hotfixes, not install the hotfixes. So we've got some terminology we need to clean up a little bit. And then our Install All Hotfixes button is missing. So to illustrate, if I look at, if I go into the configuration screen and look at updates. It's telling me that there are recommended or critical hotfixes to install. So this install now button just navigates you to the hotfix page. Don't be confused by that. It's taking you there. And then it should, when you see this recommended banner, it should mean that we have some recommended hotfixes, which we don't. So that's a little bit of a bug we're working out. Doesn't impact you negatively. It's just if you're trying to figure out why we're saying there is, but then not listing any, that's why. And then the correct functionality is that you can install all the hotfixes at once if you want by clicking this button, and a install all button is supposed to appear up here and it's not. So that's a little bug. You can still install them individually and it will work just fine. Great, so those are a couple of known issues that we have. I will remind you, if you are, or tell you if you're new to the group, we do another event every week. It's called the Low Code Campfire. It's the same hour, but on Fridays. And this is more of a conversation. We get together with a group of users. You're welcome to join us. We talk about low code. It's an opportunity to talk about things that you either accomplished or are struggling with. And oftentimes the user group knows far more than the head of support does on how to solve those kinds of things. So it's a solution, it's an idea starter, and it's a really great investment for your 1 hour on a Friday. So please join us. The link for that is going to be on the chat as well. Here are all the links, and I'll ask Patrick if you'll paste those for me. But you can register in advance for that, for the Low Code Campfire. You can get to our recordings on YouTube. Please take advantage of the community portal. There's a great opportunity to ask questions there and get support from your fellow Plantain app users. And then there's a webinar feedback form that you can give us feedback on this event and what you'd like to see, or anything at all about this webinar. Great. So we'll move on now to low code, hands-on low coding. We've been building a fitness center application, and today we're going to dive into focus really on how do I get an invoice out. And we'll talk a little bit about the fitness center, but really this is a generic functionality that somebody who wanted to generate an invoice could use, at least as a starter, to generate an invoice out of your system for anything. We're approaching it in a kind of a generic way, and then eventually we'll wire this up to our fitness center to be able to invoice for memberships on a monthly or quarterly or yearly basis. If you haven't been following along, in Café episode 126, we had an interview with Tico, the solution, the product owner for the fitness center. We learned all about what he wanted to get accomplished, and we started in on some analysis and planning for that. In episode 127, we started building out the data structure, and we'll take a brief look at the data structure here. We haven't finished building that out, but we're going to jump right into invoice functionality today, generic invoice functionality, and then in a future episode, we'll wire that up to our fitness center. So what we'll get done today, we will figure out how to create an invoice, how to add line items to the invoice. So every invoice might have 1 to 5 line items that will be included in that one invoice. And then at the end of that, we'll generate a PDF. And we should be able to get through all of that today. We got 45 minutes. This is low code. We'll get along with it. The first thing we're going to need is some data structures to hold the invoices. And so we'll be doing an invoice entity that will have an invoice number, a customer, sold by, grand total. And well, I'll talk a little bit about invoice number, particularly because I don't want you to get confused with invoice ID. But the idea is that Plankton app, as you create records, is going to assign a unique ID to the entity. So there'll be an invoice ID. But oftentimes businesses don't want the ID of a record to be the same thing as the invoice number. And so we'll support being able to have an invoice number sequence that's completely outside of the invoice ID. So I just don't want you to get confused on that. And hopefully I won't either as I move through putting this together. And then for each invoice, we can have any number of line items. And so we'll have a line item entity that will, each line item entity will have, each line item row will be linked to an invoice. It'll have a title, description, quantity, a unit price, and then we'll compute an item total for it. So it'll be in the data. And then we'll go on to create some ways to work with that through workflows. But we'll start with just these item entities, and so invoice entities. So let's get building. Let's see, I can close this out. And so we're working on our fitness center application. I mentioned that we had in our last episode talked a little bit about the database that we've built. And so we had these were the database entities that we had identified we wanted to build. And just the one that I want to point out today is that we're going to be working with people. Invoices are going to be sent to people, and they're also coming from a people. The business owner will be the person it's coming from. I don't know, maybe that's the right answer, the wrong answer, but I'm going to link it to people for both the customer and the sold by. And so we'll be using that ID to get there. And then these are the fields that we built into that. And so we'll be taking advantage of those. Great, let me put that out of the way. And so here's our fitness center, and I'm going to go into the configuration of that, and we'll start building some entities. Okay. So in doing this, we're going to create a new entity, and I'm going to take advantage of a namespace. We're going to add a namespace for invoicing, so that everything that we do for invoicing can kind of be identified as invoice. This is a convenience. Namespaces are in this case a convenience, just kind of a filing system. But we're going to create a namespace called invoice and save that. The property the name of this is going to be an invoice, in the plural of that, invoices. And we've been putting all of these in our back office maintenance. And so we'll do that to have it be a place on the menu. Properties that we're going to have is invoice number. This is that separate sequence number that I was talking about. And I'm going to do this as an integer number. We're going to have a customer. And customer, as I said, is a person, is a person. So we're going to create a person, or make it be customer as a person. And then we're going to have sold by also as a person. We'll see how this goes. We might need to adjust this later on, but I think this is going to work for us. And then the only other field that I want to capture in the invoice is the grand total. I'm going to say that is a money type field. So each invoice is going to have an invoice number, a customer, who it was sold by, and a grand total. The invoice number is going to be the display name, which is something that's hyperlinked. We're picking a hyperlink there. And I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but we'll make these all sortable just for fun. And we'll save this change. I'm not dealing again today with permissions. We would want to normally set some permissions based on who we want to allow to see and edit and change these things, but I'm going to leave that aside for the moment. We can come back to that later. So we'll save this, and so now we'll have an invoice entity. I'm going to use the view page and new tab icon so that it's going to just open up the invoice for me, and I'll have that to refer back to when we could manually put in information in here. And so perhaps we start with invoice 1 and we have a grand total of 0. We didn't make these required, so I can just add it that way. But we can just see that the ability to create an invoice exists within the system and list them out. Great. So that's we've got through the first part, invoice entity. So now let's do. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question about invoice before you move on? So you have the invoice number, and we also have an ID, but I'm guessing that the reason you have invoice number also is so that we have that display name. Is that correct, or was there another thought behind that?
Thanks for, yeah, I appreciate that. This is, the idea is that oftentimes in a business, the invoice, accounting is going to have a opinion about what their next invoice number is. This is, let's say the fitness center is up and running and they've been sending invoices for years. So trying to make the ID number from a record match up to the invoice number would be very hard to do.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So what I'm doing in this case is just to allow that the invoice number can be set for anything that you want, and it's an accounting thing, not a data access thing. So we have two different concepts.
And later on, if we wanted to, we could probably create some logic to auto increment them as well. So yeah, okay, cool.
And we will actually do that. We'll go.
Okay, cool.
There's a couple of different normal techniques. You might have a parameter file someplace that has what your last invoice number used is, so that you can go get a next invoice. In our case, we're going to take the highest invoice number in use and add 1 to it, which is a pretty simple SQL thing to do. Thing to do. So yeah, thanks for, again, that's kind of a confusing concept, but yes, then this becomes the hyperlink that you can click down into and see the details of an invoice. In this case, there's not much detail to it, but it is there. So, and then the fact that we have invoice number 100 will kind of come into play when we use that logic. If we're doing things right, we'll get a record ID of 2, but a invoice number of 101.
Yep.
Okay. So that's invoice, and then we'll go ahead and deal with creating the invoice line item as well. So that would be, we're going to create a new entity. It is going to be of a namespace invoice. And this is going to be item, plural. In our back office, I'm going to put these underneath invoices just so that they have a logical place to be. And then we'll add some properties. So the first property is going to be an invoice, and it is an entity of type invoice. So we'll be able to link from our line items to an invoice. It's a very simple one-to-many kind of linkage. So this is one way to use our type entity. We'll have title, which will be text, description, quantity to be a decimal number, and unit price, which will be money. And then when choosing to have an item total property, this will also be money. And so while we won't be entering this, it will be computed quantity times unit price. And so that'll be very easy computation for us to do. We'll make title be the clickable link. And again, I'm not going to spend time today on permissions. So we'll save that out. Take a look at it. So I'm going to view the page in a new tab, arrange things a little bit here. So I have invoices and then I have invoice line items. I'm not going to create anything here at this time. We're going to start right away with moving to the workflows that will deal with this. We're going to have two workflows, one that's going to create an invoice and the other that is going to add an item to the invoice. And so I've done some pre-planning here. The create an invoice is going to take two inputs. We're going to accept who it is sold by and the customer. And then it's going to compute that new invoice number that we were talking about, that 100 plus 1. We'll create the invoice and then send out as an output the invoice ID. I suppose if we wanted to, we could also put out the invoice number. It's just, maybe we'll do that just to keep some clarity. So this is our target. And so let's build a create invoice workflow. I find working this way, doing the planning in the same way that we'll end up doing the work is kind of useful. You just work through it. So because this is exactly what a workflow needs: a name, the inputs, the process, the output. So we can do a little bit of copy and paste work here to get this set up. So we're going to go to workflows and create a new workflow. It's going to be in the invoice namespace. And we'll go ahead and give it a name right away so it doesn't get saved accidentally as a new workflow. So this is going to be the create an invoice. And I'm going to work right away on inputs. So for my inputs, I want the sold by and the customer. And so I'm going to just grab these on my clipboard so I can work with them. So we're going to do a sold by. Now, parameters can't have spaces, so I'm going to close up that space and look in our entities and say that I want sold by is a person. And then the other one from my clipboard is customer. And this is also a person. So we have our two inputs. And so from a processing standpoint, we're going to do two things. We want to compute a new invoice number. And I'm just going to copy this again so that we can use that as a comment in our processing. So the ability to to compute that next invoice number, we're going to do that as a SQL action because we want to run a SQL query that's going to give us the next invoice number we want to use. And so we're going to run, the title of this is going to be pretty verbose, run a SQL query to compute the new invoice number. And we can actually work through, I'm going to open in a new tab to just kind of show you how I worked through the SQL. Just get back to our application here so that I can go to the SQL console, which I haven't turned on yet. So here it is, turning on in the general tab, turning on the SQL console. And so now it's going to appear here for us. This shows us our data structure. And so I'm going to just kind of show you how I developed this query. I'm going to select everything from app invoice, and we can get all of our fields. Here's the invoice number is really the thing that we want, and we can copy that name here. So maybe we'll just do this invoice, select invoice number from app invoice. There might be a lot of invoices there, so there's a SQL function called max of invoice number. And I'm going to rename it as new invoice number. So now we're getting, it'll only return one row, the highest value of invoice number. And I'm going to say +1. So now this is how we're getting this next invoice number. Whatever the highest number is on file, we're just going to add 1 to it. So this is how I built that up. And so now that we have a good SQL query that does what we want, we can come in here to our SQL action and use that query. It's going to output a column called new invoice number, which we're going to store it as a result. So this is going to give us our new invoice number, and that's all we need. This box is a little bit small, and so I'm going to just open it up a little bit just so it looks nice. But we've accomplished our first step where we computed a new invoice. The next thing we want to do is create the invoice with that number. And so that is going to be an action of type create new invoice. It's the invoice number that we want to create is the one we just, whoops, that's not it. The one we just created, the invoice number. I'm using the Windows V, by the way, if anyone doesn't know that, to be able to get to the clipboard options. That's the Windows feature I'm taking advantage of. The customer that we need to pass customer IDs and sold by IDs, those person IDs that were passed in. So I'm going to save this and just remind what input we have. We have the sold by coming in and the customer. And when you pass in a sold by as a person, for example, it's going to have the property of, it's going to have all the properties of person. We're going to use the ID property to be able to identify what we want to create. So in our create new invoice for the customer, we want to use customer ID. And for the sold by, we want to use sold by ID. The grand total, we're just going to initialize it at 0. When we create this invoice, it has no amount. And then the output token that we're trying for here is going to be called probably, we'll call it invoice ID. So this is going to give us the ID of the invoice that gets created. And so now we've done the two things we were setting out to do. We'll add an end event and start working on our outputs. The outputs that we want to do, we want to have the invoice ID, which is, that's what I called it, right? Yeah, invoice ID. So it has a output name called invoice ID, and the value of it is, I forgot my brackets. We want to put out the value of the invoice ID. The other thing that we wanted to output was the invoice number. And so that was the new invoice number. We again want the value of that new invoice number. So we're all the way up to saving and testing. But we're going to need some people to work with. So let's go take a look in our database at our entities, and we can look for persons. We'll open up our persons and see who we've got. Oh, we only have one person, so let's add another person. Patrick, do you want to go to the fitness center?
Sure, probably need it.
So now we have person 1. I'll be the who's selling it, and we're going to sell it to the customer will be Patrick, 1 and 2. So we can go back to our workflow and test it out, passing it who's selling it, person 1, who's buying it, person 2, and we run it. We get 2 outputs. Invoice ID, the record number is 2, the invoice number is 101. So that worked as we expected. And if we look at our invoices and refresh, we have record 2, 101. The customer is Anderson, sold by Warner. Good deal, $0. So our first objective of being able to create an invoice was taken care of, and we can move on. The next thing we're going to need to do is be able to add an item to an invoice. And so our that's going to be the name of our workflow. We're going to pass it an invoice of type invoice. All these other fields, title, description, quantity, and unit price. We're going to compute the item total, create the item, update the invoice total so that that's always correct as we're adding. And then we'll output things like the ID of the line item we created, the total of the item in case the caller needs to know what the computation was, and the current invoice total. So none of those are perhaps necessary, but it'll be nice proving that everything is working right. So let's dig into that. We are going to create a new workflow. Sticking with our invoice namespace. Name invoice. And we'll start with our inputs again. So we need an invoice, title, description, all those are going to be inputs, and so we'll paste them here as we go. So invoice. I picked up some white space on the invoice thing to demonstrate. I did that on purpose to demonstrate how to fix that. It is an entity of type invoice that we're going to pass in. The next one is title. And description, right, text, quantity, it's going to be a decimal number. Keeping these consistent here. Again, we can't have white space, so we'll do that. And this is going to be money. So the caller is going to provide what invoice they want to add to and what it is that they're adding, and we'll add it for them. So that's the inputs. And so we can move on to the processing. The first thing that we want to do is compute an item total. And so the item total is going to be a computation we can do using a token to get there. So this is going to be a create or update a token. We're going to create a token or a variable that's going to hold that. And it's going to be, we're going to be computing the item total. So we'll override what the title of this thing is. And the item total that we're going to be computing is going to be item total. So now this is the place we know we're going to be using. I'm going to get some things in here we're going to be using. We know we want to multiply quantity, and we want to multiply it times the unit price that came in. And so these are the variables that we have to work with, this times that. But how do we do the math? Well, I'm going to go off to our tokens and get the right syntax to do some math. We look up the math tokens. We can see example is called DoMath, and this is the syntax that you can use. We can kind of prove this out. We can just paste the example. 1 + 6 is 7, minus 2 is 5. So this should give us 5, and it does. So here's how we can do some math just by passing in an expression. And so I'm going to use that format to get what I need to do. So that's kind of my cheat to remember how to do some math. So what we want to do is put our variables into this equation. So instead of this math equation, we're going to say quantity and then use the asterisk. That's the sign for multiplication. And so quantity times price. And so this should give us an item total. So we'll save that. So that's the first step. And yeah, so the next thing that we want to do is to create a line item that has, to create that line item, then that uses that total that we've computed. So let's get that done. This is going to be to a create new invoice line item action. It's built for us. And now we have to pass in all the things that it needs. So the first one is invoice, and we have named all of our variables the same as the inputs, which is kind of a convenience thing. So we can, it makes it very easy to know what to type here. So we're going to pass it the invoice ID. Now, as a reminder, on our input, the invoice is of type invoice, and we get access to every field of what's passed in. And so the ID is the property that we want. So that's the invoice ID. And then we're also going to use the other things that are passed in. We're just going to push those right into the record. So the item total is the thing that we computed, and this should be on my clipboard here. Yep, item total. But for reference, here's where we computed it. Item total gets its value right here from this math, and so we're passing it in to the item total. The output token that we're going to get is the line item ID. We're just going to use this as part of what we're going to pass out. Output parameters. So this gets our record created. So we've accomplished this one. And so now finally we want to update the invoice total. And this involves a couple of steps because we have to go get the invoice. We have the invoice. We need to compute the new total and then update the invoice. So let's take a look at that. Looks like, so the invoice came into us here. That's what I was talking about, the invoice. And so we're going to have the grand total property of that we can use in some math. Sorry for my clicking around here. So again, we're going to do a compute a create update tokens action to get that. And I'm gonna do a copy and paste here. So we want to, this is actually total. And so what do we have to work with? I'm going to kind of work through this process again. We have the invoice grand total that came to us. We want to multiply that times we're going to add to that the item total that we computed. That's going to be the math we wanted. And then again, I'm cheating getting the syntax for this here. So that I get the syntax right. So instead of that sample math equation, we're going to do invoice grand total plus item total. That gives us a new grand total. And then finally, we want to update the invoice total as a action. So we can do that using partially update invoice. To update invoice total. The invoice we want to update is our same invoice by ID. We're going to change the grand total, but leave everything else the same. And the value we're going to give it is new grand total. So this gets us all the things. We're computing the amount on the item from the quantity times price. We're creating a new item, computing the new, this is going to be invoice total. I like to make these very readable. And then we're updating the invoice total and we're done. So now we're on to outputs. And so we'll do outputs here. And what can we output? Well, we have the item total, which we can output. Stuff value. Have the grand total, which will be the same thing as our new grand total variable. And we can also send out the line item ID, which is, did we get that? We created the item, yeah, there it is there, line item ID. And so we will output that as P. So we're down to the point, I'm going to just hit save just so I don't lose all that work. Looking away from this, you could lose your work. Don't want to do that. When it's time to save and test, sometimes it's useful to just provide some default values so that you can work through these. So I'm going to provide an invoice ID. And again, looking to see if I can find, we have an invoice ID number 2, not the 101. We want a record number. So invoice number 2 that we're going to add some test line items to. And so I'm just going to provide that as a default value. This is going to be something like membership. Quantity of 1, and maybe this is $59 on this invoice. So by providing all these test values, this gives us a chance to, when we do save and test, all those values come up as the default. And so we can just use those to add a sample line item. So we'll run it, see if we've done it right. It's given us an item total of 59, which that makes sense. 1 times 59. The grand total on the invoice has gone up from 0 to 59, so that's right. And we get an item ID of 1. So we can take a look at our invoice line items and refresh this. We can now see that on invoice 101, we have an ID of 1. It's a membership, 1 times 59 for an item total of 59. So we got our 1 item on there. Let's try another. So this time we're going to keep the same, some of these same defaults, but instead of saying membership, maybe this is a diet plan. And let's say it's a weekly fee, so we'll say 4 times $2 a week. And so this should give us $8 more on. We run it, we had $8 more on, the new grand total was 67. And we have a new ID. So again, watching the invoice go up, we have 2 things on our invoice now. Diet, 4 times 2 for 8. And what is that? That should be $67. And if we look at our invoice and refresh for that same invoice, $67. So we have a basic invoicing system that works. Did I skip past anything, Patrick? Anything I need to spend a little more time on?
I don't think so.
Okay. So in our last 10 minutes, we're going to work on creating an invoice PDF. And I think we can get there. Patrick has given me a nice template to work from. So the idea here is that at any time along the way, you can pass in an invoice ID as an input. And for processing, we're going to go out and get the customer and the sold by information and generate a PDF. The output of that is going to be a URL that we can load and take a look at the PDF. So let's do that. We will generate PDF. So I'm going to go to workflows and create my third workflow. Same here. And we'll give it the name of invoice PDF. Work on our inputs. So we want an invoice that comes in as type invoice. And that's all we need, just the invoice, because we're going to get everything else in our processing. And so the first one is going to be a read a person. Customer. And so we're going to work from the invoice. So person to get customer. So the customer that we want is invoice colon.
You're in the connection string text box.
That saved me 5 minutes. We want the record ID, and this is the, it is called customer, right? Let's look at our invoice to make sure. So on another tab, we look at our invoice fields. And yeah, we have customer and sold by. So that's right. So we want the invoice customer as the record ID we want to get. And for that, that's going to be creating a customer output token. So this gives us access to all the fields from customer. We had all the fields from invoice. This is going to give us customer. And then we're going in the same way, we're going to read the other person. Person sold by. So the record ID for this one is going to be the invoice sold by. I'm going to create a token called sold by. So now we have access to all three things: the customer, the sold by, and the invoice. So oddly enough, we're all ready to generate a PDF. So if we look at our PDF options, generate PDF, invoice. And so we're going to start out, and oftentimes I do things and it's like, first you get it to work and then you get it to work right. So I'm just going to get it to work at all here by, we have some HTML that we want to populate into this. And this is the template that Patrick gave to me, a bunch of HTML here in a little editor window. And so I'm going to paste it in, and we're not going to worry too much about what it says. It's got a lot of other stuff from the last time it was used. So it's not going to be right, but it will work. The output of this is going to go to, let's see, what I skipped some stuff here. The output that I want to, the name of the file that I want to create is going to be called the, something like this, invoice number with a GUID on the end, just to make sure it's a unique file every time. Place that I'm going to put this is in the temp folder. Oh, I don't have a temp folder. Well, I'm going to cheat and just create one. And I'm going to leave these options pretty much alone, but I am going to output the absolute URL, because this is what I want as an output. I want to just be able to send the URL to the browser or whatever to be able to see it. That'll be our output. And our output, then it's the PDF URL is going to be the name of it. And its value is going to be this thing that was done by the generate PDF. So let's save and test this. First of all, to save and test, we need an invoice number. And again, it's not an invoice number, it's an invoice ID. So we're going to use number 2 to do this. So we'll pass it a 2. It's going to do its work and give us a URL that we can take a look at and see what it does. So it gives us the general format. We didn't fill any nice things in here, so it kind of works, but now we can make it work right. So I'm going to close. I'm going to work some more with our invoicing. This invoice editor actually, instead of this generic one that Patrick has passed me, I'm going to clean it up a little bit. So we'll do a little bit of HTML work. So what we had before was a quote example. We're going to call this an invoice, and instead of saying quote for, we're going to say invoice for, and this is customer. I think these names are right first. Just got to get the token name part right. So it's for customer, and I'm not going to work through all these, but I'm just going to find the amount here. And so instead of saying quote amount, we'll say and so when this gets processed, when those tokens get resolved, when we do our generate PDF action, just going to take that whole thing and replace it into this text again. So delete out everything and paste it again, but with our values. Save and test again, and that invoice was 2, right? Let's try that. So now we see invoice for Patrick Anderson, and I didn't get the invoice number in there, but we have our dollar amount, and some formatting would be necessary. It's got 4 decimal places if you only wanted to, but the $67 and the Patrick Anderson part is in fact correct. So while we didn't get it fully cleaned up, we got there, and you can see the technique then would be to use the right tokens in this template or whatever. I mean, we could compose it from scratch, but I wanted to fast forward. So getting a template that we can just pop in, put our tokens into, and then start generating PDF. But yeah, I think we got there. We had the workflow.
And then ultimately we could actually put the line items in as well by iterating through them before we get to the PDF.
Absolutely. So that would be the next. I think that's where we'll pick up when we take up this topic again. We'll get the line items into that invoice and then wire it up to our fitness center. Good. I want to thank you for joining us today. We'll be doing this again next Wednesday at whether it'll be this topic or another topic, we have yet to decide, but we will do another low code cafe Wednesday this hour. Thanks for joining.